But what you're seeing right now, that if you're watching a cavalry unit through several months of the Civil War, that is the basic maneuver right there, going from point A to point B. That's true of the cavalry, that's true of the infantry, that's true of the artillery. Because they're at battlefields like this for just a couple of days, and then they'll sit there for a while, and then when they decide to go somewhere else, then they're on their way, just moving in a column some way or another from one place to the other. This is how they kind of come out of that column and deployed and then back into it. And that really is the thing that sets the cavalry apart. Their ability to move from point A to point B is a lot better than any of the other branches of the Army. Therefore, it falls to the cavalry to have a somewhat different role in the function of the Army than any other branch as well. When we talk about a battle like the Battle of Stones River, the set-piece battle is pretty much the infantry and the artillery. The cavalry will certainly be part of that story, but their part is highly unique because of the nature of their mobility. And that is really the key thing for cavalry. Now, prior to the Civil War, and even during the early stages, people were thinking about cavalry the way it had always been thought of, back since the days of the knights, which is you use it as blunt force trauma. A wave of cavalrymen power upon themselves to blast holes through lines made perfect sense, and it worked very well. But in the age of the Civil War, with weapons having greater accuracy and distance, and these battles being more firefights than actually collisions, that's no longer the case, and so cavalry's role evolves, and its focus gets on the mobility. Cavalry has several jobs to perform in the context of working alongside of our Army. They are information gatherers. They go out and use their mobility to get out beyond where their Army is or is moving to try to scout out enemy positions and things and bring that information back. At the same time, I just have to kind of watch. They like me pretty much, but I just want to make sure. On the flip side of that coin, the enemy's cavalry is trying to do the same thing to them, so cavalry is also tasked with putting out a screen to the front or the sides of the enemy, keeping the enemy's cavalry engaged and far enough at bay that they can't get that kind of information. On a set-piece battlefield, they're often posted on the ends or the flanks of the Army. Their job is to provide flank security. The Army is most vulnerable on its edges because everybody's facing this way, so when the enemy gets around behind, that's a real problem. So cavalry's job is to be there, a mobile force that can hold the enemy back if they're trying to get around that flank and get the information back to the commander quickly so that hole or that threat can be repaired. Conversely, like here at the Battle of Stones River, if you are the attacker and you're going after the enemy's flank and it starts to cave in, you could try to roll in even faster than your infantry and turn a retreat into a rout and make it go even better. And that just about happened here for the first several hours of the Battle of Stones River with John Wharton and his cavalry. Probably the other thing we latch on the most is the other role of cavalry is to kind of do that behind the enemy. To get in there and raid, get in behind him, use your mobility to stay away from the enemy even though you're inside his turf, and destroy supply bases, rip up, tear up communications, roadways, bridges, things like that. And for Nathan Bedford Forrest and his cavalry, which the 7th Tennessee was a part of, twice here in Murfreesboro, not during the Battle of Stones River though, he would perform essentially that service, actually performing a in behind the enemy lines raid to try to disrupt the enemy and mess up his plans. That's a lot to put on a group of men, which actually, when you take the numbers, are not even close to being the largest group of men in any particular army. Now the men are beginning to move into position now to kind of show you a sense of tactically how you work with horses when you're engaging with the enemy. So the commanders come to draw pistols, which is the handheld weapon, generally 6 shots in a cylinder, and the men will begin moving forward to kind of, again, this will be part of that early, if you're out in front of the Army, you're trying to probe and see what's going on with the enemy down this way. So they've made visual contact with the enemy now. Now, they could fire their pistols, but here in the National Park Service, for safety reasons, we don't do firing from horseback. But even if you did, the chances of hitting somebody with one of those things while you're bouncing around on the back of the horse is not all that useful anyway. If you think about it, though, there's two main reasons you want to just shoot that pistol if the enemy's coming at you. One is you make the enemy do what? If I go bang, what are you going to do? Duck and stop. The other reason is if they're out there trying to provide some reconnaissance, they may not have to send the rider back. If they start shooting their pistols, the guys back here better know, hey, they've met the enemy now, we better get ready. So even the noise itself acts like a little bit of an alarm clock. What you're seeing is how they will, and they can do this forwards or backwards, how they move their men, always keeping some of their men facing towards the enemy to fight while the others reposition themselves. If we were watching this with an infantry line, it would take the whole program to move that different distance. Cavalry mounted on horseback can move very quickly and reposition themselves quicker. But what Nathan Bedford Forrest and John Hunt Morgan and even commanders on the Union side began to realize during the war is, since really firing from horseback with our pistols was not that accurate, you can imagine trying to do a long arm was even harder to do. The best thing to do is to use your mobility, get to where you want to be to fire at the enemy, dismount from your horses, and then use a stable firing platform. And this, in fact, is when we're going to actually start firing the weapons, so if you want to cover your ears, go ahead and do that. So you notice the men keep their same kind of wide intervals, which is part of the cavalry drill. They tend to be a smaller force that will be out, working in front of a larger force. So to cover that larger distance, they have to spread themselves out instead of the shoulder to shoulder that the infantry would use. So what they did there was fire a volley. Now everybody empties their weapons at once. There's pluses and minuses to that. There's a whole wall of lead going down range. Hits the enemy. If it smacks them hard enough, it might stop them or make them go back. Drawback is, everybody's empty. If it doesn't stop them, here they come. I skipped a few, it's okay. So this was firing by file, which under the conditions the commander is now, he just wants them to do it once, but this could also be a way to allow the men to basically just roll down the line firing and keep loading and firing to kind of keep up a continuous fire on the enemy. Often engagements sort of devolve into that kind of an exchange back and forth. Now ultimately, again, either on the advance or the retreat, when you're on the ground here, what you want to do is keep some men, the men that are loaded, facing the enemy. And now he's actually calling the numbers. Remember, he counted them off, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now 4 holds the horses. So every time cavalry goes into a fight like this, they lose a quarter of their men taking care of the horses. But that's important because without their horses, they're nothing but infantry out here. And as you see the weapons up a little bit closer, you'll see that their weapons are somewhat shorter than those used by the enemy's infantry, and therefore lack a little bit of distance and firepower. So now you're seeing he's deciding to move them back some, and they leapfrog each other, but always keeping the men that are loaded in the front. That way, if the enemy makes a sudden surge, at least you got somebody there that can let him have it. Now he's going to start remounting the men, because the beauty of this is you get off your horses, you fight the enemy. If it works, you keep on going. If it doesn't work and they start pushing back and you see another opportunity somewhere else, you don't have to take a half an hour or 40 minutes to march over there for infantry. You get your men back on your horses and you move there really quick, and that's a real force multiplier. Nathan Bedford Forrest, during his raid on Murfreesboro, was outnumbered by the Union garrison by several hundred men. And yet he convinced that garrison's commander to surrender by using his ability to move little pockets of men here, there, and everywhere and make it look like he had hundreds more men than he really did. Plus a pretty good poker face. and when some of the men have remounted the last ones to go back, you'll still put men on horseback forward. Again, this is not a stable platform to fire from, but the men getting on their horses, that's the point where they're at their most vulnerable. They cannot defend themselves, so their comrades have to do that for them. And then they just put it all back together again, and like I said, they can take this show on the road and move it anywhere they want to, and they can do it in right quick fashion. You put these tactics together with all those different jobs that the cavalry has during the early stages of the war here in 1862. It's not a wonder that the Confederate Army, despite the fact that it was losing some of the big set-piece battles on the field, still had a pretty good hand in the game, because their cavalry was actually probably ahead of the Union cavalry in the early stages of the war at the use of these tactics in all those different phases of the game. So by the time you get to the Battle of Stones River, things have begun to shift a little bit. The Union Army is starting to get its act together, and you'll actually begin to see a bit of equality on the battlefield, starting with the fight right here. So the men are now going to stay up here a little bit closer to us, and they're going to give you guys a chance to take a little closer look at the various equipment that they use to execute the drills and motions that you just saw out there just before.
Saw us move the men around and actually fire on the ground. We would have, in real battle scenarios, been firing off of the horses as necessary as shock troops. But everybody knows the cavalry for the saber. The saber was a staple with the cavalry, and the cavalry trained with it up to World War II, so it is a cavalry weapon. However, by the time of the Civil War, it was sort of an outdated weapon, and Nathan Bedford Forrest, he recognized that he was outnumbered 3-1. If he got one man fighting three with a saber, they're outnumbered, but he can get a 6-shot revolver and equal those odds. So he told his men by 1863 to throw away the saber and get them a pistol. So in the Western Theater where we're at, and especially with Nathan Bedford Forrest, it wasn't a common weapon. However, they did train their men while they did carry them, and they trained them by teaching them the School of the Saber. And what the School of the Saber did was taught the men how to take this saber and fight an enemy, whether it be an enemy on the ground or on a horse, against a saber or against a spear. And it's a very effective tool to teach the men to know how to react when being attacked by their enemy. And so that's what the School of the Saber was, and these men would drill it until it was just an instinct to them. And so at this time, we're going to go through the School of the Saber and show you the way that they were taught. What we'll go through is a series of parries. And parries are blocking movements. It would knock the enemy's saber or spear out of the way. It would deflect it. Then we're going to go through points and thrusts, which are stabbing movements. It's attacking maneuver. And then we're going to do cuts, which is another. It's a slashing movement with the saber. Very effective, very good way to teach the men. This is called the School of the Saber. Draw! Saber! Present! Arm! Order! Arm! Head! Parry! Guard! Right! Parry! Guard! Left! Parry! Guard! Front! Point! Thrust! Recover! Guard! Right! Point! Thrust! Recover! Guard! Left! Point! Thrust! Recover! Guard! Rear! Point! Thrust! Recover! Guard! Against infantry! Front! Point! Thrust! Recover! Guard! Front! Cut! Right! Cut! Left! Cut! Present! Arm! Return! Saber! That's the School of the Saber. Like I said, when we were fighting 3-1 odds, it wasn't a good tool, but it was something the men learned, and so we like to show that. And it's very interesting to watch the way that the men were trained. This time we're going to bring the men up and let them start talking about the weapons that were used mostly, and we're going to start with the revolvers and let them talk about the pistols and show you how they were, what they had and the way they were used. So this time I'll ask some of the men to come up and talk about their revolvers. In 1841, the first successful revolver pattern was made, and that was the Colt Patterson pistol. It was made by Samuel Colt. It was used by Captain Samuel Walker of the Texas Rangers to fight off Indians, and he knew how effective it was. When the war with Mexico came about, he was put over the U.S. mounted rifles, and he got with Samuel Colt, and they came up with the Colt Walker. It is a 44 pistol. It was the first Magnum ever invented. It's a longer pistol than the other ones you'll see. It is meant to fire off horseback, effective up to 100 yards. The reason for this is because rifles are cumbersome with one shot. This will give you 6 shots. They were issued in tubes. Got a second one right here, and they were issued in bearskin pommel holsters. These pistols were, like I said, very effective off horseback. After the Mexican War, the men brought these pistols home with them, and the ones that went into Confederate service would have brought them with them, as you had to supply your own weapons. 1847 Colt Walker. This is a 1851 Colt Navy revolver. It is 6-shot. It is 36 caliber. Samuel Colt was a businessman first and foremost, and so he sold these pistols to both the North and the South throughout the war. In fact, at the start of the war, Navy veteran Forrest bought 500 of these very same pistols and smuggled them into the South in a wagon covered with paint.
1860 Army, 44 caliber. Put your powder and ball in the cylinder, and you have to load it with your ramrod, then you put your cap on the back. You have to do all 6 of them like that right there. Issued by the Union Army, Confederates carried them when they could get them. 1860 Army.
As guys just talked to you about the revolvers, you can see they had 6 shots in them. They were very effective shot weapons. You could ride up, empty a lot of rounds at one time. However, they loaded really slow, so if you got into a fight, you shot up your pistols, it took a little time, so they weren't really effective at that point until you could reload them. But like I said, they worked really well off horseback, worked really well to be shock weapons. The heart and soul of the Forrest Cavalry is what we're fixing to show you, which is the long arm. Like you saw us do out here, he dismounted his men and used them as infantry. And so all his men have long arms. The boys are going to tell you a little bit about those. This is a 12-gauge double-barrel muzzle-loading shotgun. This weapon, of course, is a smoothbore. At the time of the Civil War, rifled weapons were coming out, so this weapon was coming obsolete for military use. However, at 35 yards, it is very effective with bucket ball rounds. It's a personal item that would have been brought from home. The Southern Army was a volunteer army, and so they had to outfit themselves down to their horses. So this would have been a very common weapon at the first of the war that they would have brought. To tell you how effective it is, at Shiloh, a federal regiment formed a square against the cavalry charge from the 8th Texas. What that is they sit there, they're not shooting, they're using their rifle bayonets to fend off a cavalry assault. When 8th Texas was armed with these, they turned and emptied both barrels into them, and a company of men wiped out an entire regiment of federal infantry with these weapons. What the Trooper Helton has here, right on up Trooper Helton, is infield carbine. This was a very popular weapon, both sides. All the arsenals would have had them in the South as they captured them. You'll notice it's a short rifle. The infantry carried what we call 3-banders, which were really long versions of this. But this is the shorter version for the cavalry. Very popular with cavalrymen because it was short. As you can see, he could load that. It's a muzzle loader, just like the shotgun. He could load it from the end and pop his cap on there and fire that from his horse very easily. It's lighter, it's easy to maneuver on a horse, and so it was a very common weapon in the cavalry. It's a very reliable weapon. It would fire almost every time when you load it. So that's very reliable, very important. We've seen these things in all kinds of weather, and still going strong, be used. So it's a very good weapon, but it would have been common on both sides, like I said. One thing that was liked about this was it was the same caliber as the infantry weapon, so the ammunition was very available. General Nathan Bedford Forrest captured a lot of federal infantry, and a lot of his men actually carried 3-band Enfields, which was a longer version. But when they could, they got a hold of the musketoons and carried them because it was a shorter rifle and was a whole lot easier to maneuver on horses. Enfield musketoon.
What I have here is 1859 Sharps carbine. And what makes this rifle so special is it's a breech loading rifle that shot paper patch bullets. So the bullets, which was a lead bullet cast, would sit on top of a paper tube full of powder. Insert the round back into the rear of the gun, slice off the back of the paper tube, the exposed powder, set the cap, and you're ready to fire. For that reason, this weapon can be reloaded rather quickly. This is 1859 Sharps carbine.
This is a Smith carbine. This was a Yankee weapon. It's a 50 caliber, and this is also a breech loader. Kind of open like a break-top shotgun. These were primarily issued to the Yankees, but when I got this weapon, it was never fired and only dropped once, and I picked it up and took the guy's ammo. Of course, he was running. He didn't need it anymore. This was very, very common during the war, mostly in the Federal, but we did pick them up. This is Smith carbine.
So you saw the weapons we used for war. So what do you think was the most important tool that cavalrymen had? It's horse, that's right. Without these horses, we'd be infantry. None of us want to walk and march and carry those big old long guns. We want to ride and fight and go have a good time, so we joined the cavalry. The Confederate Army, just like us, they had to supply their own horses. The Federal Army had stables and ramadas of horses behind the lines. If a Federal cavalryman lost his horse, he just got another one issued to him. The Confederate Army, they had 20 days to find them a new mount or they became infantry. And so we didn't want to do that, so they did everything they could to keep a good mount under them. And part of keeping a good mount was making sure that their saddles and equipment for riding these horses was right. We're going to invite some of the men to come up now and talk about their equipment and their saddles.
The saddle I'm riding is a civilian model saddle. It's called a muley saddle, or it's the French word mulet, meaning hornless. This pattern of this saddle dates back right the Revolutionary War period, but this was a very common civilian saddle before the war and even after the war. And even the Confederate government adopted a pattern of the muley saddle, but this particular one is the civilian model. This one I rode off with when I rode off to go to war. Just about everything I got on my saddle is civilian, but I did adapt it a little bit for military. I adapted where I put my blanket roll on it. So I kept my civilian saddlebags and my civilian bit, but the headstall is a halter bridle, which is a halter and the bridle combo, where the buckle, the bit buckles on it. And they were either civilian or military issue, so this one could have been either or. So this is the muley saddle.
The Texas Hope saddle, the civilian type of saddle. Looks a lot like the Western saddle, what you might see today, and that's kind of where they started, where they get their roots from. And this would have been a working saddle that I carried from home. When the war broke out, I took what I had and went and used it as long as I could until it broke down, and then I picked up something else. It was kind of hard. You know, they had a little bit of supply, but as the war went on, it was hard for the Confederates to supply their troops, so you got what you could get. You steal it from somebody else or steal it off a dead Yankee. I guess he didn't need it anymore, so he's not really stealing. He was just somebody else. So anyway, that's
actually a federal issue saddle. You see it's got black leather, which means that it would have been a federal issue. General George McClellan actually designed this saddle, and federal government started using it before the war, and actually used a version of the McClellan all the way up till they quit using Cavalry in World War II. But you'll see the saddle has got a wooden tree covered in rawhide, split down the middle. That split is designed so that saddle, as these horses lose 500-600 pounds on raids, would sit down over their backbones and wouldn't soar back to the horn. And so it was made to protect that horn. You'll notice too that it's got, like I said, black leather. It's got a lot of leather. It's got these skirts on it to protect the rider's legs. I've got a breast collar on here to keep the saddle from sliding. It's got the coat straps, and I can tie my poncho on the back, my bedroll on the back. This has actually got a civilian valise, which is like a version of a saddlebag that I would tie on top of my blankets that I've got on this saddle. We've got wool blankets under here. I've actually got a federal captured wool blanket with my federal captured mat, and the hooded stirrups. See a lot of leather, a lot of excess on this saddle, but that was the federal version. They're very comfortable to ride in. We enjoy riding them, but it is a military saddle. It's primarily all military. Get up to my headstall and bridle. This is all civilian. This is what I brought from home. My civilian saddle wore out, so I got a captured McClellan. But this would have been used primarily by both sides during the entire war. That was very well built saddle and used by both branches and by the artillery. That's 1859 McClellan.
This is the Confederate McClellan. It's a skeleton rig. It's close to mid part at the end of the war, and it'll run it low on leather and die. So it's all this russet color, just regular leather color. And then, like on the previous saddle, it had all the leather skirt and everything else. This right here is just what you gotta have to keep the saddle on the horse. You got your wide strap and your stirrups for you can ride. The 1859 McClellan.
Hope y'all enjoyed our demonstration today and learned a little bit. Like I said, as we ride by, pay attention to the men and their equipment, their uniforms, their weapons, their saddles, their horses, everything. Like I said at the beginning, very unique group, very different man to man, just like our ancestors were. And each of these pieces that we have is something that they used and needed for day-to-day life out here on campaign in the Army. So pay attention to that. If you'd like to visit camp, come down the road here. Our camp's right down here. Be glad for anybody to come visit and see us. Ask more questions. I'm going to leave a couple of troopers over here in the shade for a few minutes for anybody that can't make it down there. If they want to stop and ask a few questions, I'll have them over there. And so, again, we're the 7th Tennessee Cavalry, and I hope y'all enjoyed our demonstration today.